My brothers and sisters, it would seem to me, perhaps to you, that if we were disciples of Jesus, disciples of the Prince of Peace, the one who rose from the dead and has given us peace, that if we were a disciple of this Prince of Peace, our lives would be peaceful. But for some reason, it isn't that way, is it? And perhaps it isn't meant to be that way. Perhaps the peace that's given to us from the Prince of Peace is a peace we discover when we live in a world where there is no peace, and to embrace that world, to love that world, and then discover peace, even where there appears to be no peace. For a disciple, then, in order to live in the peace that is given to us in a world where there is very little peace, we are challenged or called or invited to acknowledge Christ publicly in our lives. And what I mean by publicly, I don't mean necessarily having to have a blog or having some kind of public arena available to you. But what I mean by publicly is not just keep it in our heart or not make it private, that it needs to be shared. Maybe shared is a better word than public. So that when people see what we're doing, they see Christ. And if we keep it private, we look like everybody else. That's the challenge of living in the peace that Christ gives us, is to acknowledge Christ in our lives. And of course, when we do that, things tend to happen. For if we acknowledge Christ in our lives, we're going to be revealing a truth. In fact, we're going to not be revealing a truth, but the truth. And the nature of truth is that truth is true for everybody. The nature of truth is that it's objective. So when we might get into little debates about my truth versus your truth, we both might have some kind of connection to the truth, but we don't have the truth. For the truth would be for everybody, because it's true. So that's one of the challenges, living in the truth and being challenged by all the falseness, the illusions, the misconceptions. Secondly, if we live as disciples of the Prince of Peace in the peace that Christ gives to us, we will reveal the truth in the virtues that we live in our lives. But when we do that, those who live less than virtuous lives will feel shamed, will feel threatened, and will try to bring us down to their level, make us look like them, which would mean that we would have to keep Christ private. And finally, there is, if we are to follow the Prince of Peace in the peace that Christ gives us, that there are always these spiritual battles that we have to fight within ourselves and outside of ourselves. The evil where God just isn't present, that we are called to be, so that we can reveal the truth. That can be very difficult. That can be very challenging. This is where Christ is acknowledged, and this is where we discover the peace in a world where there is very little peace. For in not acknowledging Christ, we may be caught up in the failures of those who do not acknowledge Christ before others and are always existing in lasting and unforgettable confusion, as the prophet Jeremiah says. Jeremiah expresses the difficulties of these challenges as he professes the truth of the covenant, a virtuous life by which to live out the truth, and the spiritual battles of kind of regretting doing it in the first place. But he also finds the hope that Jesus speaks to us today in the gospel, that God knows all of our challenges, God knows all of our strengths, God knows all of our weaknesses, even to the minutest hair on our head. And I know that doesn't say a whole lot for me. But that God is with us, and that God always protects us, and that God will always be faithful to us, even when we might find it challenging to be faithful to God. But there is an inherent path to follow in trusting the path of God. Take, for example, if you were in an English class and you did all the reading, you did all the homework, you wrote all the essays, and that put you in a good position to participate in class. And by right, you might find a little extra favor by the teacher. Not so much, kissing up, but just because teachers like when students respond. But then all the slackers in the class aren't going to like it, because the slackers are going to look really bad. And so the slackers are going to try to bring you down. They might make fun of you, they might tease you, and maybe not even about what you're doing, but for other things. The way you look, the way you dress. They might oops, sorry, in the hall. But if we live and be faithful, as if this student was to remain faithful to what he or she is doing in English class, all will be revealed. But if the slackers get you to conform to their way, something valuable becomes missing. And we become like everybody else. Disciples of Jesus stand out. If we're trying to look like everybody else, there is a challenge that we need to face. And there is a challenge that God can deliver us from. And this is the example that St. Joseph holds out to us. That he has faced so many challenges in being this father of Jesus. He's told to watch out over Mary, who somehow became pregnant by being overshadowed by the Holy Spirit, whatever that was supposed to mean. And yet Joseph was faithful to that challenge. Joseph had to then bring his pregnant wife to Bethlehem to be recorded at a most precarious time in her pregnancy. And yet Joseph was faithful to God. Joseph was called then to bring the Holy Family to Egypt to live as refugees for a while certain persecutions were taking place. Joseph had to remain faithful to that. Oh, and then there's that time when Jesus decided to hang around the temple and start teaching the wise people there when Joseph and Mary were on their way back home. What kind of anguish might that have caused? I kind of wonder if Joseph, while he was living his earthly life, was wondering whether he was doing a really good idea or was doing the right thing, because everything always seemed to be going wrong. There always seemed to be another challenge before him. He never seemed to have any kind of peace. Yet somehow he discovered that peace in trusting God. And in trusting God, he was able to allow salvation to take place as Jesus grew and matured under his auspice. And so it is for us today, in our own individual lives, where we may be tempted to look like everybody else, rather than be called to reveal the Christ that lives within us. Or even as a church, in the many challenges that we face, which affects every single parish in which the church is revealed. That God is always faithful to us. God trusts in our own creativity, as God trusted in Joseph. With that trust, we are called to great things. To reveal the truth, to live a virtuous life, and to engage evil so that it might be transformed. What challenge do you see in our parish that you, with St. Joseph, might help to engage, to transform, to bring about? This is great fodder for prayer. This is a great opportunity to allow the truth to be revealed.